In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains what type of things people actually aim for in life and what happens when you equalize the socio-cultural variability in society.
Trait neuroticism is a powerful motivator. And trait neuroticism is, let's not be too threatened or hurt, right? That's the negative emotion system. And the negative emotion system is a killer source of motivation. You know, you also see that there are scales of well-being that have been designed, mostly by social psychologists, which means they're very bad scales most of the time, because their psychometric capacity is absurdly low, generally speaking. So what you find with scales of well-being, sometimes they're talked about as scales of happiness even, is that people aren't after happiness, they're after not hurting. It's not, so they don't want to be extroverted and enthusiastic, right, and bubbly and full of smiles and laughter. That isn't what they mean by I want to be happy. What they mean is I don't want to be anxious or in pain. And so well-being scales tend to be something like emotional stability plus extroversion. But the big loading is on emotional stability, the reverse of neuroticism. You want to avoid suffering. You don't want to be happy. You want to avoid suffering. And one way to avoid suffering is not to let the lions gnaw on you. And one way of doing that is to stay in the middle of the damn herd. And so, like, I'm not being a smart aleck about this. I understand why people do that. There's real danger to being visible. There's real danger in being visible. Now, you might be successful if you're visible, but you also might be dead. So, okay. So, now, there's a number of things to consider if you're thinking about performance prediction, and one of them is, to what degree do people vary in terms of their performance capacity? And you might say, well, there's very little performance variability, or you might say there's a tremendous amount of performance variability, or you might say there's an absurd amount of performance variability. And it turns out that the claim that there's an absurd amount of performance variability is the proper claim. IQ is normally distributed, so is conscientiousness, but productivity is distributed along the Pareto distribution, and I'll show you why. And that follows a law called Price's Law from someone named Derek de Sola Price, who was studying scientific productivity in the early 1960s. And what he showed was that a vanishingly small proportion of the scientists operating in a given scientific domain produced half the output. And so what you see, and what's happening is that to do really well at a given productive task, which would also include generating money as a proxy for creative productivity, is that you have to be, a bunch of things have to go your way simultaneously. So maybe you have to be really, really smart, you have to be really, really lucky, you have to be really healthy, you have to be really energetic, you have to be really conscientious, you have to be in the right time at the right place. And maybe you also have to have the right social network, right? Like, so it's a lot of things, and each of those are small probability. Each of those are small probabilities, and then if you multiply the small probabilities together, you get an extraordinarily tiny probability. And you have to have all those things functioning before you're going to end out on the extreme end of the productivity distribution. But if you do end up there, then you produce almost all of everything. So it's a tiny number of people that produce almost all of everything. That's Price's law. And technically it is, and I mentioned this to you before, it's the square root law. The square root of the number of people in a productive domain produce half the output. Right? So if you have 10 employees, 3 of them produce half the output. If you have 100, 10 of them produce half the output. If you have 10,000, 100 of them produce half the productive output. And so what that also means is that because there's massive variability in performance, you don't have to shift your ability to predict performance very much up towards being better at it to gain substantially on the positive side, because there's so much difference in productivity. And that actually happens to be also a function of the complexity of the job. If the job is simple, which means this job has 10 rules, maybe that's a janitorial job, let's say. It takes a little while to learn it, but once you've learned it, you basically do the same thing all the time. There's not a lot of performance variability in those jobs, and most of that would be eaten up by conscientiousness, and also to some degree by neuroticism, because the people who are higher neuroticism would be more likely to miss work. But general cognitive ability, for example, is not a good predictor at all. It'll predict how fast you learn the tasks initially, but not how well you perform the tasks. But if the tasks you're doing are shifting constantly, so your responsibilities change, or you're in a creative job where you're constantly solving new problems, those are kind of the same thing, then IQ, as the complexity of the job increases, the predictive utility of IQ increases, which is only to say that smarter people can handle complex situations faster. It's like, that doesn't seem like a particularly radical claim. So Price's law dictates that there's massive individual productivity differences between people, so increasing your capacity for predicting performance even by small increments has a huge economic consequence. That was established in the 1990s. The equations were first developed in the 1990s, and that's part of the reason that I started working on performance prediction tests, because I read the economics and I thought, oh my God, you can produce a test that costs $30 times, say maybe you have 50 applicants for the position, $1,500 to administer, and it'll produce an increments of something like 30% of salary permanently for the person that you put in the position. So let's say you hire a $75,000 employee, and it increases their productivity by 30%, so we'll say roughly $25,000. You get a $25,000 return on a $1,500 investment every single year that person occupies the position. On average, that's 4 years. That's a $100,000 payoff for your $1,500 investment. I read that and I thought, oh, that'll be easy to sell. It's like, wrong. Even though the economic payoff was so massive. I told you the other impediments that emerged. But the arithmetic, or the capacity to produce these calculations, was established in the 1990s. And I'll show you the equations in a bit here. Okay, so we already talked about what a normal distribution looks like. That's the red line. And a normal distribution emerges as a consequence of chance processes. So what you see is that you get a pattern output as a consequence of chance processes. And so where you happen to be on the distribution for all of the traits that we've described is a consequence of innumerable chance genetic and cultural processes. But a lot of them are, a lot more than people like to admit, are genetic. I mean, you can make people stupider with the environment, but it's not that easy to make them smarter. So, because think about it, right? It's way easier to make something worse than it is to make something better. And so even if you take everyone and you give them optimal access to information and, say, optimal nutrition, which pretty much everybody's in that position now, at least insofar as we can manage it, you're going to get massive genetic differences in such things as conscientiousness or extroversion or intelligence. And as you flatten out the sociocultural environment, say you take everybody and you provide them with optimal nutrition and optimal access to information, which you've pretty much done, by the way, with a computer, right? Because how are you going to give someone more access to information than to give them a web-enabled computer? That's it, right? There's just no better. It's an infinite library. You can learn anything with it. So we're done. We've equalized the education landscape, roughly speaking. And then nutritionally, well, some people eat badly and some people eat better. But the option to eat well is basically open to at least everybody in North America, roughly speaking. You've wiped out the sociocultural variation. You might think, well, that equalizes people. It's wrong. All it does is reduce the variability to the remaining biological differences. You maximize the genetic variability by minimizing the sociocultural variability.
xa anh yêu rồi, từ ánh mắt nụ cười, từ đôi môi gọi mưa sao xuyên lòng anh. Thì sao mê em rồi, ngày hay đêm ôm lời, chỉ nghĩ đến em thôi, đó là do anh đã yêu rồi, anh đã yêu rồi, anh đã yêu rồi. Anh đã yêu rồi, anh đã yêu rồi, anh đã yêu em mất rồi. Anh hay mơ mộng mình thứ xa xôi, không màng về tình ái muôn nơi, sống cho là trọn kiếp đây thôi, đâu quan tâm gì chuyện đời. Thế mà lại nằm tương tư, ông tầm bà mũi xe tơ, đêm nằm trộm nhớ mơ mơ về ai.
But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, maybe you'll get sick of being the monster out of my head, under my bed. Think you're something out of my nightmares, standing right there. But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, then will you get bored of killing me?
Silhouettes of you are like a taunt. Never really know just what you want. With you I don't ever feel calm. I can feel the sweat inside my palms. Play with me like cats and a string. You don't understand the pain it brings. You don't ever wanna give me wings. You don't ever wanna set me free. You know I'm addicted to you, and it's twisted, you've been gifted with the evil voodoo. Got me coming back for more, even when I've been screwed. Dolls full of pins, pierce my heart straight through. I got issues in my head, I like you in my bed, but you keep me on red. Oh, everything is like a test, I better not text or I'll come off desperate.
But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, maybe you'll get sick of being the monster out of my head, under my bed. Think you're something out of my nightmares, standing right there. But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, then will you get bored of killing me?
So if I play dead, will you regret everything that you did, that you said? I don't think you understand what you're doing, and my heart's black and blue from the bruising. I feel like when I'm with you I'm losing. I feel like you think that this amusing. Sitting there gaslighting and confusing. Was it me? Is it me? Am I deluded? I'm the one who's always sorry, the conclusion. Even though I offer all of the solutions. I wish you loved me like I love you, it's stupid. When I'm alone with you I never feel lucid. I wish I wasn't struck by Cupid. I wish when I first saw you I knew this. When I'm with you I feel so useless. I feel diluted, my heart's been wounded. Silhouettes of you are like a taunt. Never really know just what you want. With you I don't ever feel calm. I can feel the sweat inside my palms. Play with me like cats and a string.